enough to be slaughtered for ground beef. Traces of all that medication can be found in the hamburger that you're holding in your hand, wrapped in that plastic at the grocery store. And by the way, the pollution from these farming industry factories does great damage to the earth and to the water and to the air. That is a political problem. That is the politics of food. Now, if you think I'm finished with you yet, hold on to your grocery cart because I'm just getting started. Do you want some lettuce for your hamburger? Where was your lettuce grown? How was that plant raised? What pesticides and insecticides were used to make those leaves of romaine look perfect inside yet another plastic package? How was the soil enriched? Was real soil even used for the lettuce? And if you want a slice of tomato on your hamburger, well, where was that tomato grown? What were the growing conditions for that tomato? Was it actually grown in naturally enriched and renewable soil, or was it grown in a pool of chemicals? And while you're at it, standing in the produce section, you might want to ask, why does my tomato look so perfect and it has so little flavor? When did tomatoes stop tasting like tomatoes? And what about the people who planted the tomatoes? And what about the people who harvested the tomatoes? Were they paid a fair wage? What were their working conditions like? How much carbon emission was pumped into the atmosphere just to bring that one tomato to my hamburger on a Saturday night? And the same question could be said about that onion you might want to slice for your hamburger. And what about that jar of pickles? Do you ever look at the ingredients on the jars? Thank you, Julianne, for the sermon this morning. Do you ever think to yourself, I am a college graduate and I've never heard of half of the ingredients in that jar? What are we buying? What are we eating? What are we feeding our children and our grandchildren? Now maybe you're finished, but you're not finished quite yet. Because you've decided that you might like to have some cheese on your hamburger, turning it from a hamburger to a cheeseburger. And so you go and you buy some sliced cheddar cheese. And of course, it is wrapped in a plastic package again. Even though it is cheese, even though it is a dairy product, even though cheese is actually a living thing made with living organisms, you have come to accept that the grocery store will take this living thing, wrap it in plastic, and that it will somehow interrupt the agricultural act of a dairy product from a cow. More and more plastic. Have you noticed how this one little trip to the grocery store is mounting up with plastic after plastic after plastic? Oh, and one more thing. You have to have buns if you're going to have a cheeseburger. And so you go to the bread section. But then you remember, oh, wait a second. I think I have some hamburger buns at the house. And so you go home and you look at the buns and you realize that they've been in your pantry for 2 weeks. But strangely enough, they still feel fresh. And they smell more or less fresh. And they even taste not so awful. But now you're confused. You begin thinking, how can this be true for bread that is 2 weeks old? Fresh bread, that is to say, bread that's actually baked in a home kitchen or a bakery. Well, the first day it is great. The second day it is good for toast. By the third day, unlike Jesus, it is finished. What is real bread? This is the politics of food. Now, I don't know about you, but what started out as a grilled hamburger has me on the verge of a nervous breakdown. Yet these are only a few of the political conversations that are raised when it comes to our food. I could go on. We could ask questions like, why do certain neighborhoods only have fast food restaurants and convenience stores. That's political. Why do organic foods cost so much more? That's a political issue. Why is diabetes and obesity afflicting a disproportionate number of poor people in America? That is also political. What about the packaging of food and its impact on the environment? That is a political issue. How can we somehow return to our kitchens and actually purchase real food and cook real food and enjoy real food rather than buying expensive food products that promise nutrition but in fact are completely divorced from the reality of genuine food? That is a political issue. It is a social issue. It is a cultural issue, and it all involves food. And until we begin to understand it and address it in some kind of significant way, not only will our food become worse and worse, our planet will get worse, and our humanity will diminish. And so what do we do about it? Because after church, I'm hungry, and I want to eat something. And tonight, when the day is over, I'll want to sit down and eat something. What do we do? I don't want anybody to leave here today feeling guilty. That is not the point. But we have to acknowledge that we all have a complicated relationship to food, and sometimes we make good choices and sometimes we make really bad choices, but we should at least be aware of the political ramifications of some of the choices that we are making. And so I want to offer a quick round of wisdom for you today. It comes from Michael Pollan and also the writer Wendell Berry. First, from Michael Pollan. Years ago, he wrote in a major essay in the New York Times, and he started with this sentence: eat food, not too much, mostly plants. Pretty good advice for all of us, right? Eat food, not too much, mostly plants. But Wendell Berry, who himself is a Kentucky farmer as well as a brilliant writer, he gets even more practical. Here's what Wendell Berry suggests. He suggests, first of all, we need to participate in our food production as much as we can. In other words, if we can grow a little garden, we should grow a little garden. And if you can't grow a garden, then plant a few herbs and cherry tomatoes on your patio or deck. And if you can't do that, then you can join a community vegetable cooperative, and there are many of those in Los Angeles. And if you don't want to do that, then at least try to buy some of your produce and your fresh foods from a farmer's market, because that helps support smaller, more humane farms. And the closer you get to the farm, the better the food typically is for your body and for the planet. Think about it like this. Eating is the final act of agriculture. It cannot be divorced from farming. To eat is to participate in this whole cycle of farming and agriculture, and we honor it best when we try to find food that nourishes us and is good for the planet. And so it starts with planting, and then it starts with nurturing, and then it starts with harvesting, but it always culminates in eating. This is agriculture. Unfortunately, most of us have lost that agrarian awareness, and so we live with this terrible disassociation between eating and farming. Berry also suggests that we should gain as much knowledge as we possibly can about our food. In other words, it would be really nice for children to begin to learn that food does not come to us in plastic. Food does not come to us in cans. Food does not come to us as a wrapped product. Food does not come to us as a processed powder. The more we can understand the difference between real food and food products, the better our eating will become, and the more our agricultural network will thrive. There is a difference, for example, between a wheel of cheese that has been crafted by a farmer and a plastic bag of Cheetos that I eat at night when I'm hungry. One is food, the other is a food product. The more we gravitate toward food, the better we are as human beings. Michael Pollan suggests that we need to learn to cook our own food. And when you think about it, we are really the only animal species upon the planet that cooks. No one else cooks. No other animal cooks except the human being. And that means that cooking is essential to our humanity. Some of us may need to learn to cook all over again. Some of us may need to learn to cook for the very first time. But cooking real food gives us more quality control, and it moves us away from those highly processed foods that every nutritionist in the country will tell you are not good for us. Plus, believe it or not, cooking your own food is much cheaper than going out and buying it at a restaurant. Pollan makes a couple of other points that I think are quite wise. One thing that he says is that when we go to the grocery store, we need to shop what he calls the edges of the store and not the middle. You know what you find in the middle of the store? That's where you buy your Cheetos and your Lucky Charms. You find those in the middle of the store. But on the edges of the store, that's where you find your produce and your fresh fish and meats and vegetables. That's what you do. You shop on the sides, not so much in the middle. The other thing that he says is that we should eat more and more food that our great-grandmother would recognize as food. That's a pretty good criterion. If our great-grandmother would not recognize it as food, maybe we should find something else to eat. It's a good chance then that it's only a processed food product rather than real food itself. My grandmother, great-grandmother, for example, she knew how to bake a chicken. She knew how to fry a chicken. She knew how to boil a chicken. But I am sure she would have been completely baffled had someone handed to her a bag of frozen chicken nuggets. What are those? One is food. The other is a food product. One more piece of wisdom today. And this one comes from our faith tradition. And I see it and I ground it in our story of creation found in the book of Genesis. In this story, God's creating all of the wonders of the earth. Plants and the animals and the fish and the birds, and they all begin populating the earth. And every time God finishes one part of the creation, God pronounces this benediction. God says, "It is good. It is good." We want our food to be good. We want our diets to be good. We want people to be fed upon this planet. And so we need to find food that is good for our bodies, good for our pleasure, and good for the planet. It is good. And I think that we're seeing something happening in our culture right now. I think we're beginning to see that people are trying to turn back from the industrial diet that developed in the 1950s and 60s in America and returning to real food from farm to table in a way that is just, in a way that is delicious, and in a way that is good for all God's children. It is good. And then this city of Los Angeles, where we have such diversity of people, all people truly are deserving of food that is healthy, that is safe, that is delicious, so that we can pronounce the benediction, "It is good." This means that food is a gift. And like all gifts, gifts need to be enjoyed to the utmost. And like all gifts, they need to be taken care of with great attention. That's the politics of food. It is good. And so I hope that no matter what you decide to fix for dinner tonight, or whatever you decide to fix for dinner on Monday or next Saturday, that you will do it with some degree of awareness and with gratitude and with joy. And please don't have a nervous breakdown over a cheeseburger. It's not worth it. But at least be aware that every meal that we have is the culmination of a complex political and agricultural and spiritual process. And the more we understand it, the more we participate in it, the more likelihood we will be able to utter one of my favorite prayers. God, that's good. Amen.
Each week it is my pleasure to work with Scott and with Jonathan and Christoph in curating this worship service. I love what I get to do, but there are Sundays, most Sundays in fact, that I sit back and I can't believe the beauty of this space and of each element of this service. Who could have imagined that this is what would happen today in this place? I always say to people, you don't want to miss worship because you never know what's going to happen. So today, as we come to this time of offering, I want to tell you for just a moment about my experience as a member of this church, not just as one of your ministers. Fred and I, years ago, 35 years ago, made a decision to invest in a church where I was a minister. We invested in a church that grew from a small church to a large church. Years later, we invested in a tiny boutique church in Dallas filled with artists. We invested in that church just as we invested in the church where I was senior minister in Missouri, a church that had undergone horrible situations and circumstances and that was almost dead when we arrived. When we came to First Church, we made the decision again to invest in this church. A few weeks ago, Scott said that he was looking for investors for the future. We laugh sometimes at our house about the fact that we think we could have had a nice summer cottage in Maine, but we also talk about, through the goodness of Facebook, how we see those investments paying off in the lives of young people who were in our churches, in their families, in the good that they are doing, in not only continuing to transform their own lives, but transforming the lives of so many around them. So as we look at celebrating our 150th anniversary, Fred and I invite you to join that group that Dr. Colglazier has asked for and invest in First Church by giving your pledge this year. Our offerings will now be received.